Today we're going to change how you look at your stash, which is perfect since it's time for Shop Your Stash Summer. I was this close to getting rid of a die I barely touched since I bought it, but something about it kept holding me back. So I gave myself a challenge to use just that die and only my stash to create something that feels totally new. Today's video is a bit of a double up with a holiday Instagram hop I'm in today, so I knew I needed to start with a wreath. This beaded wreath came from Waffle flower, and it's pretty much been unused since I first got it. I don't know if it's the overly realistic feel of the leaves that came with it, but what I do love about it is that circle made of circles. Every time I would go to destash it and pass it on to someone else, something held me back because it's such a great geometric shape. Next, my old trusty signature polka dots die. This is a cover plate that cuts a dotted background, of course, but I love to play with the dots as well. They're all the same size, which makes them great for creating patterns or berries, which is my vision for today. And finally, Altenew circle quilt, another old favorite. That quilting pattern fascinates me, but today I'm using the little pointed oval shapes as leaves for my wreath. I cut the wreath and the quilt from white, and the dots from some white cardstock I had inked with Samba ink. Red and white is such a classic Christmas color combination. My red dots are perfect as little berries, and I glued the little leaves from the quilt on the next little circle bump on the wreath, so they're kind of hugging the red berry. Once I had done a couple and I knew it was going to work, I changed my method and I put the red berries in every other bump. And this is the look I always knew I could get from this die with some dots, so I'm glad I didn't destash it. Next came the more tedious part of getting the leaves glued down in between each berry. They're not really designed for this, so there's not really a perfect way to put them, other than just kind of eyeing it. But over time, I could see better where exactly I needed to put the liquid glue and how to angle the leaves so they popped out of the sides enough without covering the red berries. Having this on my rotating platform meant that it was easy to keep my hands in the same position and move the wreath. And trust me, I knew there was glue likely kind of spilling out, and I was quite happy to wait until it was all dry before I tried to lift it up from the grip mat. This could have also worked really well with a green wreath and leaves and red berries, or white berries, or you could do leaves with multicolors of berries, or just the berries or dots for a fun frame. When I got to the end, I picked up the grip mat and I folded it back away from the wreath to pick it up, and then I set it aside to dry. For my sentiment, I actually used something quite new. This Merry Christmas from Waffle flower came out last year, and I colored it with that same Samba ink. I like to do both sides of a die cut, so I know there's no white edges that will show. But honestly, I know I'm putting it on a white card, so any white edges would just blend in. This step would be more important if I was putting it onto a dark background. Anyway, I then realized that this doesn't even fit inside the wreath, and I thought about ideas for that, like cutting the wreath and taking out a bump or two on each side, and that felt way too risky. Yes, I do have limits, and after placing all those leaves, I really wanted to get a pretty card from all that work. So I looked at where I thought the red Merry Christmas would best sit on the wreath, and I figured that if I popped it up enough, it could sit on top of the wreath, and then I would just need to cut off the C and the S from the word Christmas. Those parts of the sentiment die cut could rest on the wreath itself. To add a little more interest to my mostly white card, I cut a square panel and I used an old retired Ellen Hudson circle die set that cuts stitching holes. This will create a frame around my wreath and tie in nicely to the berries. And to make the frame more noticeable, I popped up the white square with foam tape underneath. This created space between the panel and the card base, and that means there will be little shadows. I assembled the rest of the card with liquid glue, and I made sure the wreath was centered before adding glue to the back of the sentiment die cut. You can see the red ends of the Christmas word and where I've stacked up the shortened white layers to ensure that the whole sentiment is well supported and still laying flat. And as a finely sparkly touch, I added little dots of Stardust Stickles. This card is very simple, very clean, but it still has a ton of details that make it special. As we talked about a few weeks ago, when you combine your products, your cards will be totally unique and nothing like anyone else's. And then I just decided to play with some of my leftovers. I started by cutting a square from the red polka dot background, and I glued down some of those diamond shapes from the quilt die in between 4 holes. It's kind of neat how they fit so well. It's fun to play like this, especially with leftover bits that you might be planning to throw out. There's no risk if something doesn't turn out. I went back and added some white dots as well, and I decided this one is probably not something I'll use today, But the fact that those pieces fit together like this is really neat, and I may give it another try sometime. Like maybe sooner than you think. I also had leftover red dots plus the white outline, so I decided to use them to make another card right away, rather than trying to hold onto the pieces and remember where they were. I popped up an old favorite Avery L sentiment on circle die cuts, and I added big dots of Stickles in the pattern. This card is also very clean and beautiful, and this simple design could be easily changed up to work for any occasion with different colors. Now here's another quick look for the wreath. A while ago I made this panel with a layering ink smooshing technique that I learned from Tiffany. I've hesitated to use it all as one piece because it's really intense, but also I haven't wanted to cut it up because it's the only one I have. I think you've probably been here, right? Anyway, I did cut it up with the quilt cover plate, and I created another wreath. For this one, I cut the bumpy circle from gold cardstock, and I put one leaf on each bump, but alternated the direction. Isn't it pretty? And it's so dramatic on black. And of course, I have the cover plate die cut, which is still beautiful. I cut 2 more of the beaded wreath die from white cardstock, and I layered them up. This time I'm popping up the wreath itself. And you can see I have a little plan for the leftovers again, and I'll also use what I learned earlier with the red and white piece. I added the stacked up white wreaths to the back of the golden wreath. Oh, it's so pretty. And then to assemble the card, I used the cover plate die cut, the outline part of the quilt die, as my mat. And I glued the wreath to a circle die cut with another waffle flower die cut sentiment, cut from gold to match the wreath base. This time I glued the sentiment directly to the panel since it fit inside the wreath, and that's another way to create interest with different levels of dimension. Now for the leftovers, here's where I used that idea with the little diamonds over the polka dot background. I put a black mat behind it for some drama, and I added little gold dots all over. Maybe I went too far, but I think it's really fun. Next, I used the white outline and some of the little leaves or petals. I couldn't bear to throw them out, and I think they look so pretty here, broken up with the white space and accented with gold. And then finally, with the last of those diamonds, I did more of a random arrangement, with most of them down the left side, but a few scattered around another Avery L sentiment. I'm so glad I followed my gut feeling and held on to this die. Is this a challenge you'll accept? Go grab one of your oldies but goodies, or maybe something you've held on to without using and you don't know why, and then put it together with some of your other stuff, old or new, and make something new and unique. To get you started, I've got 2 kind of related videos that I know you'll enjoy. One is 18 free ways to refresh your stash, and the other is 2 ways to use leftovers to make cards. Choose one or both, and I'll see you there. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.